My name is Shelley Reid. I am president of Visionary Women, and along with my fellow wonderful board members, it is our great pleasure to welcome our leadership circle members, our visionary circle members, our advisory board members, and our special guests, and anyone else in the audience who is not a member of Visionary Women, and hopefully you will be very soon. We have a turbocharged evening for you, and we are streaming live on YouTube. So everyone smile. And we have with us tonight the incredible, multi-talented, New York Times best-selling author, award-winning producer, the person responsible for one of the first all-female ensemble television shows, Sex in the City, game changer extraordinaire, Candace Bushnell. And at Visionary Women, it is our goal to bring you the most premium, high-quality programming that we can. And like the four ladies in the ensemble cast of Sex in the City, who found their support in their sisterhood and created their community of friendship, Visionary Women is that community. And if you're in this room, you're part of that community. And please know that your voices are being heard. And for those of you who are members of Visionary Women, please know that you are making an impact. In the last 3 years, we have been able to grant, because of your membership, in excess of $1.5 million to a broad spectrum of organizations and initiatives that support women and girls. It's pretty incredible. So before we start our program, there's some people I want to thank. And first of all, our volunteers who are steadfast and loyal for the past 3 years. We could not do this without them. And they're all over the place, a whole group of young women. And of course to Red Car Winery, who has been such a wonderful supporter of Visionary Women. And to Nicole Johnson and Planet Events, we could not do this without you. And last but not least, to this evening's sponsor, Aston Martin. Now, not only are we thrilled to welcome Aston Martin into the Visionary Women family, but this is a really big deal for us because it's the first time that Visionary Women has had an automotive sponsor. And not only does Aston Martin make the most incredible luxury vehicles, but Aston Martin is at the forefront of supporting women in the highest levels of management. You'll see what I mean. So when I said turbocharged, I meant turbocharged. And our guest this evening from Aston Martin is Laura Schwab, president of Aston Martin of the Americas. And not only is this lady a former tennis champion, she went to the University of Kentucky Law School, and she is the first female in the history of 100 years of Aston Martin to be in the position as president in any division of Aston Martin. And she is one of 2 women to be president of a car company anywhere across the board in the automotive industry, a very typically all-male industry. So there's lots to tell you about Laura Schwab, but when she's not on a plane, she's based in Aston Martin's Irvine offices in Irvine, California, and we are delighted to welcome Aston Martin and Laura Schwab.
Quite an introduction. So the only downfall of tonight is I've been given apparently 7 minutes, and I'm a Southern girl, and we don't even introduce ourselves in 7 minutes. So I'm going to do my best, which is why I ensured that I actually I wrote it down. So normally, and you gave a little bit of my background, and I typically would use a forum like this and a stage like this to tell the story of how I ended up getting this amazing job. But seeing as how I was going to be speaking before Candace Bushnell, which doesn't happen every day in my life, I decided that I probably needed to rewrite my speech a little bit. And for all of us, she's obviously a household name. And she's really a woman that has had us hooked on all of the dreams, the disasters, the sizzle, and the friendships that remind us of our own friendships. And I can't tell you, Candace, how many times I dreamed of living in New York City and having really curly hair, which is why I'm glad these waves are all back in again, because I'm almost Carrie. And how often I watched Sex and the City and what it meant to me in my very formative years. I always thought of myself as a Charlotte because I wear this pearl necklace everywhere. Like I do cardio bar in this pearl necklace. So, and there's a story because pearls are very important to people from the South. But anyway, I thought that instead of talking completely about my childhood in Kentucky and growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, I was a very, very overly competitive child, and knocked children over in cotillion to win a bag of M&Ms. So, no, it was gross, and my parents were slightly embarrassed at times. But, I then was fortunate enough to go to Notre Dame on a tennis scholarship, and then to law school, where I had no idea if I wanted to be a lawyer. But I'm going to talk a little bit about law school and why law school was very significant to me, because as I thought about what I would say before I spoke before Candace Bushnell, I was like, what's it really all about? And it's about friendships. And for me, I have a story of friendships that I'd like to share with you. And it's not a story I've actually ever shared, and I do a decent amount of public speaking, so it's quite emotional for me. You're the first to actually hear it, and it's something I haven't revisited in quite some time. But when I started law school, I spent the summer before law school in Europe, and I graduate from Notre Dame. I'm the captain of the tennis team. I'm feeling like I'm hot shit, and we're playing at Roland Garros, and meanwhile, everyone going to law school was apparently, there's an assignment before you start law school. Okay, I did not know this. I know, and it's not like I'm mimicking Elle Woods. In my head, that's what law school was. I was gonna go, look fabulous as much as I could, and then seemingly graduate at the top of my class. And that actually isn't what my 3 years looked like. And when I started in law school, I actually found myself to be quite vulnerable. Everyone that was there seemed to know that they wanted to be a lawyer. I had a government Spanish degree from Notre Dame. I had no idea what the hell to do with that incredibly marketable degree. So that's how I sort of ended up in law school. And I found myself dating the wrong person. And I've thought about it a lot because it's a long time ago now, and I'm not totally sure how it happened. I'd been the star of the show. I'd spent 22 years of my life being told I could be anything I wanted to be, anyone that I wanted to be, and there were no boundaries. I have an incredibly supportive family, but when I got to law school, I was no longer the star of the show. I was an okay law student, and the person I was dating exploited my vulnerabilities at the time. And I'd always thought of myself to be so strong, and I was like, how does this happen to people? Nothing like this would ever happen to me. But somehow it did, and it became very easy for me. After 22 years of believing all the good, it became very easy to believe the bad. And I was told I would never have a great job, that I would never be a lawyer, for sure, and that my chances at success were quite minimal. And I can't believe after all that went into my life that I found that so easy to believe. But when he didn't get to me with those words, and if the words weren't enough, he then took all of my degrees and everything I'd earned at Notre Dame, and he burned them. Because it wasn't enough for me to know that I had been the captain of the tennis team, and it wasn't enough for him to know that I had graduated from a prestigious university. It was important for him to destroy the things that defined who I was. But that moment in time, maybe it needed to be that extreme for me to work my way out. Because I ended up sneaking out in the middle of the night, and I moved back to Louisville, Kentucky with my parents, and I commuted 4 hours every day for a semester and a half to complete my law degree. And this person had isolated me from everyone I knew, and I was ashamed to tell my friends. I'd actually been quite ashamed to tell my family. And ultimately they knew because I ended up at their doorstep begging to be at home. And so I was in Louisville one day, and one of the girls who was sort of popular in law school walked up to me, and she's like, "Why are you in Louisville, Kentucky? And I thought you were living in Lexington." And I just burst out into tears. And I didn't even have to tell her what had happened, but she embraced me. And from that day forward, she and my other friends, they became my pack of wolves. And they became my fortress because no one was going to ever get to me again. So as I got ready to graduate from law school, I was like, I'm not going to the graduation. It's too much. I've been through too much. Getting the degree's enough. And my parents were like, oh, you're going. We've got you. So I emerged from the fog, and I went to my law school graduation, and as I walked across the stage, I remember looking at the audience, feeling fearful, but also feeling quite hopeful about my future. Another important story about where my pack became so important to me was I graduated, I'm studying for the bar exam, and my best friend from Notre Dame is another wonderful woman, and I had opened up to her about what had happened, and so we're celebrating my birthday, and my mom and dad are like, oh, well, these packages have arrived from you from Marisa, and I was like, she doesn't need to send me anything on my birthday, everything's fine. And I opened them up, and she had called my high school, she had called Notre Dame, and she'd gotten every single one of my diplomas recreated. And these stories feel like these mythical stories of friendship, but for me, they're true, and they're what propelled me forward. So moving forward, I say many of my girlfriends don't even know this story, and the reason I don't tell it is because I've never wanted anyone to feel badly for me, and I've never wanted to be perceived as a victim. I was in a lost place, and my pack surrounded me, and they took care of me. But from that point forward, I vowed to use my energy to prove at least one person wrong, but actually to rebuild myself. So I ended up deciding I didn't want to be a lawyer, and no offense to all the lawyers in the room, but when I found myself deciding whether we should utilize a semicolon or a colon in a contract, I was like, maybe I'm not going to be a lawyer. And I packed up my bags, and I moved to Southern California with the hopes of finding any job. And I applied for every job possible, and I was turned down from every single job I applied for because I was told I did not have any experience. And I was like, no shit, I know this. I'm trying to get some experience. So I have a tremendous empathy for people in their mid-20s. And I finally took a job. I got a job at a startup company in Southern California. I didn't even know what their business proposition was. They happened to sell cars online. And I was paid $20,000, and I worked 3 jobs because I didn't want to ask my parents for money because they'd already paid for me to go to law school, and I probably was supposed to be a lawyer. And that's how things started for me in the automotive industry. I ultimately landed a job at Land Rover, and my first job there was data entry. And every job nobody wanted, I said yes to. And every skill set I didn't have, I went to school at night. I mean, I had a law degree. I didn't know how to do an Excel spreadsheet. I took classes, and everything no one else wanted to learn, I wanted to learn. And I stopped trying to prove him wrong, but just to prove myself right. I ended up working 15 years for Jaguar Land Rover. I was the head of marketing for Jaguar Land Rover in the UK. I've met every member of the royal family, except for Candace Bushnell till tonight, and the Queen. But I was very preoccupied with work, and I've actually started thinking about this because there was no time for men in my life. I had my tribe and my pack, and I was working my way up in a very male-dominated industry. Every boardroom that was full of middle-aged white men in navy suits, I wasn't afraid to walk in the door and disrupt what they were talking about. But I do know I turned a little bit into a Miranda. I tortured my team with long hours of work and probably too many emails. And that actually did turn around for me. It was the day of William and Kate's wedding, and a friend of mine said, "You're so boring, you never go out, all you do is work. Please come to this pub." I walked into a pub and I met a tall, handsome British guy who spent 5 months asking me out, Nick. And finally he brought me an apple pie on the 4th of July, which like you kind of have to go out with the guy who bakes you a homemade apple pie on the 4th of July in England. And I agreed to go out with him. And our first date, I think he Googled like how to impress a Kentucky girl, so we went to horse races. And I was hooked on Nick. And he's been infinitely supportive of me and my career. And one quick story about how supportive he is. I was recruited by Aston Martin to have this unbelievable role. And they had been following my career. I was like, these people are following my career, you know, the coolest car brand in the world. And I went home after the interview, and Nick said to me, well, how was it? And I said, they offered me a job. And he's like, well, what's the job? I said, they want me to be president of Aston Martin. And he looked at me, and you know when you're like, okay, what's this gonna mean? We're gonna have to have the talk, and I'm not good at the talk. And he looked at me and he said, that's the coolest fucking job in the world. And I was like, well, what are we gonna do? He's like, we're gonna move wherever they are. And we didn't have the talk. We picked up and I moved thousands of miles away to Southern California. One final twist, 5 weeks after I took my job at Aston Martin at the age of 42, Nick came to see me for our anniversary, and I didn't think it was possible. I shockingly got pregnant 5 weeks after becoming the first female president and only second woman ever to have this job in a car company. And so my initial thoughts were, they're gonna wish they hired a man. And the good news is they didn't wish that they hired a man. Nick and I travel pretty much every week. He's my rock, but he also knows that my tribe, they're the ones that got me through the hardest time of my life. And whenever they're my priority, he's the person that supports me. So we're raising a 3-year-old little girl we've named after my mom because she's also an important person in my life and has been there for me. But what I guess I would say to you all, and it's just a sort of a snippet of my life, you know, whether you're in good times or in bad, and I so rarely talk about how bad the bad times are, so I appreciate you letting me share that with you. You know, we really do need to support each other, and seeing all of these women walk in this door, so happy to see one another, introducing them to one another while they're standing in line. We have to celebrate one another, encourage our friends, surround ourselves with wonderful people. I always say my friends, I think they've got like their effing Google alerts on before mine are, because anything about me, they're the first people to be like, oh my God, you did it again, it's amazing. So even though we live far away from each other, and we all have our lives and everything that we're doing, we never forget our important days of being Carrie, Samantha, Charlotte, or Miranda. our bond never changes, it never wavers, it in fact becomes stronger, but all of the war stories are what created this sort of fortress that we have with one another. And I guess I would say this, and I'm so very passionate about women and women in the workplace, and that's why I'm so honored to be standing here tonight. You know, especially in the automotive industry, there's a perception that there's only room for one woman at the top. And that is absolutely incorrect. Treat the women you work with as part of your tribe. I do. When I started at Aston Martin, there were no women in our leadership team. I'm happy to say we're now 50% women of our executive team. One of them is my dear friend Alexa, who's our Chief Marketing Officer, sitting here tonight. And make sure you make the time to mentor young women. You don't know what people are going through. So mentor each other, support one another. We really owe it to one another to lend a hand, some counsel, and obviously pay forward the support that our tribes and our families and everyone's given to us. I'm so humbled to be on the same stage that you will be on, Candace, and I'm honestly so honored to be part of this. Lily, thank you for, I don't know, for us falling in love with one another, but thank you all for allowing me to talk about my story, and I get to represent the most beautiful cars in the world, but more importantly, I get to represent an amazing group of women that got me here, and my family, and then all of these incredible people I work with. So thank you very much.
Well, I think that's the power of perseverance and an expression of the power of friendship. And before we start our program, just tuning into the power of friendship, we want to extend our appreciation to UTA and to a very, very special, talented friend, Leslie Silverman, who graciously is hosting us here in this wonderful space. So wherever you are, Leslie, please know you're the best, and we love you, and we're very grateful. So we're going to welcome to the stage our star, Candace Bushnell, who is here on her book tour of her latest national best-selling author book tour. Before she sees anyone else in Los Angeles, you're going to hear it here. Is There Sex Still in the City? Candace is going to read an excerpt from her book to begin with, and then we'll start the discussion with Candace.
Don't have an endless amount of time, but thank you to everybody for having me. Now, you know I'm a big Instagram fan, so I want you all to give me a big Instagram welcome. Yay! Women empowerment! Women empowerment here in Hollywood. All right, let's go. Is there still sex in the city? The impetus for writing this book. It's really my life, and it's not a sequel to Sex in the City. It has different characters. They're in different situations that I think very much mirror the reality of women's lives today and how we are living in what I call the new middle age, and how this ain't your mama's middle age. One of the things that inspired me to write this book was that I had very much the same feeling when I started writing this book as I did when I began writing Sex and the City. And that feeling was of women being in uncharted territory. And I think when you look at this cohort of women, it's a group of women who have really been in uncharted territory, really since, the 70s and the 80s, when there was a big influx of women going into the workforce for the first time to try to have it all. And one of the things that many of us realized was we could have a career, but we couldn't quite find that guy to marry us. And that woman, of course, became the Sex and the City woman back in the mid-1990s. And that was me. I was in my mid-30s. And I really felt like being single at that time was really quite a feminist act. You know, back then it did take a certain amount of bravery going against the system and what society was telling you, to dare to take the risk to count on yourself and to not count on a man. So I felt that this was a very courageous endeavor on the part of many women. And, you know, back then, if you were a single woman in your mid-30s, 20 years ago, in the mid-90s, you really were an outsider, and people really thought that there was something wrong with you. And it makes me happy when I look back and I think about how much things have changed since then, and how women are so much more independent and, to some extent, in control of our lives, up to a certain point. So what happened to me was that my life was, you know, it was like Sex and the City. I had lots of girlfriends, and a lot of friends like me. We found our Mr. Biggs, we found our Mr. Biggers, we found our Aidens, we found our Harrys, and maybe we found our Steve. But in other words, we went off and we had basically what I call a reproductive lifestyle, which is when you're partnered with someone, you're raising kids, your career's going, full guns, and you think you have the happily ever after. But the problem is that nobody tells you that life goes on, and the happily ever after may not be forever. And that was what happened to me. I found myself divorced in my early 50s. It was something that, no, I hadn't envisioned in my future. And the first thing that I really wanted to do was to basically run away. And I really did feel like a failure. And so I went away, and I did what I really wanted to do for a couple of years. And then I realized, you know, living by yourself with, you know, only your housekeeper who comes a couple times a week, and then, you know, writing for 10 hours a day, and, you know, that's probably not all that healthy. So I decided to move to Sag Harbor, where I had two girlfriends. They were single, and like me, they were also childless. And I think that we thought we were going to do what women always say that they're going to do when you're younger. Like, what if things don't work out for us? Well, we're all going to live in a house together, and we are going to sit on the front porch, and we're going to make fun of people who go by. I don't know why making fun of people is always included in this story, but for some reason it is. And for a very short time, it was like that. We thought we would be like the Golden Girls. We made dinners, and we went to the farm stand, and we came up with every excuse for any sort of holiday to wear hats. And I thought, well, maybe things are going to go on like this forever, and it's okay. And then, as inevitably happens, a whole bunch of my friends got divorced. And what do single women do when they're suddenly single again? They go to where the other single women are. So what happened was, it was probably a group of it might have even at one point been 12 women who came out to Sag Harbor, which I describe in this book as a place called The Village. And unlike me, the first thing that they all wanted to do was to start dating again. And there were some surprises, one of which I hope that maybe we will get to later, and it's the cubbing phenomenon. I don't know how many of you guys have experienced this. Yes, I can see somebody in the audience is like, oh my God, it happened to me! And it's younger guys in pursuit of older women, and I call the older women catnips because they are not necessarily looking for this attention, and I call the young guys cubs because they are on the prowl for these older women, but that is another chapter. One of the things one realizes almost immediately in midlife dating is that the men your age are not necessarily attracted to you. They haven't been raised with this idea of, okay, the partner I'm looking for is a 50-something woman. It just doesn't pop into their head. It should, and it probably will very soon, but it doesn't at the moment. And, you know, because men can go out with younger women. And so as a woman, what do? You think, hey, I'm going to try to game the odds in my favor by going out with the older guy. And I call that guy the he's as old as your father guy. And this is what happened to me. Dating a man who's 15, 20, even 25 years older means, given the fact that you're now middle-aged yourself, a man who's 70 or 75 or maybe 80. Now, you wouldn't think that there would be a large contingent of men around that age who are dating. But when you think about demographics and how so many of the boomers are in their later years, it actually makes sense that there's a crop of 60, 70, and even 80-something men out there who are acting like they're 35. Now, I happened to encounter one of these men at a party given by a married couple in their early 60s. There were lots of 50-something single women there like me, because this couple decided we're going to invite all the single women in the neighborhood at once, one party, get it over with. And then they're going to invite 2 or 3 of the local eligible men who turned out to be these senior age players or saps. These are older single men of means, meaning they have enough money to add it to their list of attributes and are often still employed in a lesser version of the high-powered career they once had. And at some point during the party, I must have talked to one of these men, because the next day, Ron, who was the host of the party, contacted me to let me know that out of all of the 50-something single women there, a fellow named Arnold had singled me out and wanted to go on a date with me. Now, Ron was really excited about this. He also was suddenly really impressed with me because I'd been able to attract a guy like Arnold, who he said was a big deal and was widely admired. And he had played Ivy League football, and he was once an oil man and a newspaper magnate, and all of the Park Avenue hostesses were still inviting him to their parties. He was sought after. I thought I remembered the guy, a tall, thick, battle axe type who was definitely older. Too old for me, I decided. How old is he, I asked. Oh, he's a little bit older than I am. 68, Ron said. The thing is, these guys often lie about their ages. they fudge, somehow forgetting about that truth-revealing device called the internet. Sure enough, when I Googled him, Arnold turned out to be, wait for it, 78. That made him much, much closer to my father's age than mine. My father was 83. Arnold was just 5 years younger. They couldn't have been more different, though. My father was very conservative, and Arnold apparently is not. According to Ron, Arnold was a notorious wild man who went to Studio 54, and even to this day, Arnold still has much younger girlfriends, the last one being 42. I don't know how he does it, Ron said. I wanted to tell Ron that I didn't want to be the one to find out. And so I tried to say no. But peer pressure is one of the things that I hadn't counted on in middle age. And when it came to dating, there was a lot of it. My friends kept reminding me that it was good to go out, and it was really good that someone had finally asked me out. When was the last time that it happened? And of course I should go. And what's the harm in it? And besides, you never know. Of course, the problem with you never know is that so often you actually do know. I knew, or I was convinced that I knew, that I was not going to date a 78-year-old man, no matter how wonderful he was. What if he fell down? I didn't spend my life working this hard to end up taking care of a strange older person. But every time I tried to explain this, I realized how ageist and judgy and anti-love hopeful I sounded. Because I didn't know, did I? I didn't know what was going to happen. What if I fell in love with him? In which case his age wouldn't matter, right? Plus, I didn't want to be that woman, you know, that shallow creature who cares more about practicality than the blind illusions of love. Plus, as Ron reminded me, I must feel so honored that a man as powerful as Arnold wanted to spend time with little old me. In preparation for the date, I went to my friend Sassy's house and we looked at photographs of Arnold on the internet. His photos went back about 35 years. He'd been a big man and rather handsome. Oh, honey, Sassy said he could turn out to be absolutely wonderful. You must keep an open mind. And so arrangements for a date were attempted. We could have gone to a restaurant in my town, but no, Arnold really wanted me to see his house, which was in another town 30 miles away. However, he offered to pick me up and take me to his town, show me his house, then we would go to dinner, and then we'd go back to his house for a nightcap, and then I could always spend the night if I needed to, and he'd drive me back to my house in the morning. A sleepover with a 78-year-old man I didn't know? I don't think so. Thank you.
So we're going to have a conversation with Candace. It's my pleasure to introduce six-time Emmy-award winning news anchor of Spectrum One, my dear and special friend Giselle Fernandez, and just won an Emmy. Giselle just won an Emmy for her show LA Stories on the Spectrum Network. Thank you very much. And Giselle, who is the greatest of friends, is up at 1 at the studio by 3, and she's here tonight. Welcome, Giselle.
I'd love to feel so heroic about it, but anything that gets me away from watching the news and talking about sex in my 50s, I'm here.
Well, I want to thank you because I know you got up at 1 in the morning. I got up at 4:30. I'm cranky.
I know.
I'm like,
let me tell you something. This woman gets out of an Aston Martin looking like 60 is the new 30 and puts everyone to shame in their 30s and then tells us exactly how this event is going to go. That's a woman in charge of her own brand and her own voice, and give her a round of applause and welcome her.
Thank you.
So I want to step back away from the new book, which, by the way, critics are saying is better than the original. And I have to say, and getting just rave reviews, so congratulations.
Thank you.
But I don't know how many of you have read it. Can you give me a show of hands? I just want to tell you, it's a really fast read. I laughed hilariously. I felt shameful laughing at some of the places I did. I cried. And I felt deeply connected to the women in my life, so I so totally understand why this group is so important to hear Candace today. But I want to go back a little bit so we get a real sense of who Candace is and what she's done, because in 23 years since she wrote the first Sex and the City, she never sat on her laurels. She wrote 8 other books. 2 of them went to another series, not just Sex and the City. It was the Lipstick Jungle and it was the Carrie Diaries. And then she went on to write others, and she is internationally revered and renowned as someone who changes the landscape of pop culture. And she certainly did that with that revolutionary dating paradigm, mating paradigm in the 90s that you just heard about with Carrie Bradshaw, her alter ego, and her band of sisters. I want to take you back to the mid-90s. You were already, doing your column, and you were successful on TV, writing. But that just must have changed your life personally when Sex and the City hit, not just the book, but the series. How big, of a, sea change was that for you?
Well, this is the truth, and it's going to be a really disappointing answer. And the answer is it did not change my life at all. Really? At the beginning, it did not. And the reason for that is I was writing the column, Sex and the City, and pretty much as soon as I started writing it, there was interest from HBO was interested, ABC, I think, was interested, New Line and Fine Line were interested. They didn't exist. I did go out to Hollywood, like Carrie does in that episode. I didn't meet Matthew McConaughey, but I did meet him on another trip. And at that time, TV isn't what it was today. So, it was a different time. It was really like an analog time. So the people who I knew, nobody cared about being on the New York Times bestseller list. It wasn't about that. It was really like it was a small literary media world.
But when it picked up speed, you became a household name. Did you feel it?
Not for a couple of years, but I was just, I was doing things. Like I think in 1997, we shot the pilot in 1996, and then, in 1997, and then in 1997, I also had my own TV show on VH1, which was really like one of the first reality shows, and it was called Sex, Lies, and Video Clips.
I remember.
So I actually had a lot of things going on, and they didn't tell us anything. So it really wasn't until the show was on for a couple of years that people were like, whoa, wait, this is working. So we didn't know. So at first, it really didn't change my life.
It changed a lot of women's lives in their 30s because all of a sudden we got to live vicariously through all these fabulous women, through Carrie and the rest, and we got to explore our longings, raw and real. Sexuality was so groundbreaking for the time. It was a different time. And then you went on to do the things, and I love when you talk about super, not models, but super middles. There's a lot of acronyms that you will giggle at.
Yes.
But Candace calls women in their 50s and 60s super middles. And when you become a super middle, life happens to you. You have losses, you have loss of jobs, loss of husbands, loss of parents. So no one gets out of this life alive. And you address that in the new book. What do you bring as a super middle, still looking fabulous, that's different from the Carrie years in East Manhattan? We still kind of want the same things, but with a twist?
Well, first of all, you can't have the same things. And I think there are certain things that you do at different times in your life that are realities. You have certain levels of maturity.
But the women in your new book, the new cast of characters that you surround yourself in their mid-50s, they still kind of wanted a relationship? They still want love? They're still hopeful?
Yes, in that sense, absolutely. And, I think what's really tricky, and one of the reasons to write about this time in your 50s is that what makes it really different from those younger years is that you have to deal with real things like loss and bereavement and, all kinds of things that, at one time, it's like women are under so much pressure. At one time, these things had probably happened naturally. Like in your 50s, chances are one of your parents is going to pass away. It's just statistically going to happen. Statistically, probably one of your friends is going to pass away. But on top of that, in this modern world, we also have career pressures. Women are out there, there are women who, they're kind of, when they're getting in their 50s, they might be the sole breadwinners in their house because their husband's career could have run out. And there are just a lot of changes. And the other thing that happens is, loss affects you psychologically. It's not just like, oh, my parent passed away, now I'm going to go back to doing what I did before. It has significant psychic impact on who you see yourself in the world and what that means. And if you have, and most people have unresolved issues, and even those unresolved issues can snowball and lead to something like a divorce. So it can feel like one bad thing is happening to another. When you're younger, things happen, but you feel like you can get traction and you can get a grip. Things kind of go like this a bit. But when you get into your 50s, it can feel like everything's just going like this, and you keep thinking like, I'm coming up, and it's like, no, you're going on a trip and your passport ran out. But it's like, big and small things. There's menopause, which is
lovely.
That has all kinds of, that's kind of about loss. But to me, the challenge was really learning how to deal with loss and go forward and not give up. Because what so many women say coming into this passage is that they just feel like their pilot light is burned out and and they're going to lose their soul. I've had women say to me they've been in marriages for maybe even 20 years, sometimes 30 years. 50-something is they feel like it's their last chance to get out and shape their life the way they would like it to be shaped. As opposed to their life is being steered by a partnership where that partner is not, they're just going down. But I've had women say like, I'm going to lose my soul if I don't get out of this marriage. Which is like, wow. It's dramatic.
So all of the women in Is There Still Sex in the City, which we'll answer at the end, I got the sense that it doesn't matter what their age and stage of life is, or even what they've been through, what they've lost, you know, we're all the same age inside of ourselves in a way, and we all have that dream. It may not be Mr. Big, it may be Mr. Big bald, you know, but it's with a paunch belly.
Let me say, one of the things about middle age is Harry's looking pretty good. You know, I mean, at a certain age, it's like...
I have found that, you know, even in your book, I found the women, when they got all of you together, and here you are starting over, having to get a mortgage, which wasn't so easy, you know, really having to start over when you never think you're going to, and it's unseemly, and you're trying to find your sea legs when you're supposed to know yourself already. And all of a sudden, you put yourself out there in the book, and you find that, I love this line you said, you know, going to the bar, I couldn't even get the attention of the bartender, much less the guy to buy me the drink. So when you reach that certain age and you realize, A, men aren't looking at you like they used to look at you, even though you're fine still, how did you cope with that?
I was like, hallelujah! You know, I've never been someone that, you know, I've never felt like, oh, I had all these guys interested in me. No. So, but I used to be able to have a little bit of pull. But, you know, then you get to a point and you're like, whoa, I got no pull. And, you know, that's when it's...
That's when you have to redefine it. That's when you have to redefine things.
Yes, but you know what? I think actually what you're saying is that's spot on. You have to redefine yourself as a woman, and you know, and part of that is redefining yourself as a woman without a man. Well, it's like you have to be. It's like you have to be able to be on your own.
So let's talk about some of the funny chapters in the book, because it's probably the best way to tell some of these stories that really speak to all of us. You enter the bar and realize you're not going to meet a guy at the bar anymore, and so all of a sudden there's Tinder. And you're Candace Bushnell. Now, when I read that you went online without an alter ego, that you went on as Candace Bushnell, I was like, that was daring and brave. You found that men, as you told everybody, your age, weren't like, you know, coming up to you. But all these young cubs were like, whoosh. So you mentioned The Graduate and that famous, wonderful scene with Mrs. Robinson. Well, that's not the norm. What's good for the goose, I don't know if it's good for the gander yet. You tell us. How realistic is it to have a cub in your life when you're in your middle age?
Well, you know, that is one of the reasons to, you know, explore this phenomenon. And I should say that...
It's just for sex, right?
No. I mean, I should say that, to me, what's really interesting about the cub thing is that feels like that is a real change. You know, we don't live in a society where, you know, older women are attractive, but honestly, because of porn... You know, because of porn, a lot of things, but the MILF was the most Googled term in 2007. So you can kind of figure it out and realize, like, this is something that, you know, for young guys, an older woman is attractive and is, you know,
and why did you find
sexy.
that when you interviewed the cubs in your life? Like, what did they tell you why they wanted to be with an older woman as opposed to a younger woman?
Well, a lot of them wanted to be with an older woman because young women want things from them that they can't give. I mean, one of the things that I hear from a lot from younger guys, although, I mean, this is that young women want them to pay for all kinds of things and buy them things, and they do not have the money. They are millennials, so they don't have the money.
So this is an arrangement of convenience as well as...
I don't know. It's like, you know, guys, I have to tell you, like, let's face it, men are very resourceful when it comes to finding sex partners, okay? So that's...
You write great sex scenes, by the way. I blushed. I was like, wow.
Really?
Yeah, especially, let's talk about some. So, I'll get there. You had a coveting experience, at least in the book, with Jude. And Jude, you know, is this young, hot man, and all of a sudden he's telling you all of his problems, and it sounded in the book that you became more maternal and caring for him as opposed to like this sexual sexcapade I thought it was going to be.
Well, yes, except the story is that I met Jude on Tinder.
Yeah.
And because I did this experiment, and as you were saying, and I decided that I would go out with one guy. Tinder did set my age range originally to, I think it was like 55 to 65, and there were about 2 men available. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna get even with Tinder. I'm setting my age range to 22 to 35, and let's see what happens. Let's go. And I got tons and tons of hits, and actually the guys were writing really nice things like, oh, you have really nice eyes, and like, you're too good for this app. And at first, I was going around, I was like skipping, I was saying to my friends, look at what this guy texted me. These guys are nice. Who says there aren't nice guys on Tinder? So I found one of these guys who I thought was a nice guy. Now, before this, I had been warned by a group of 20-something women about the men on Tinder. And what they described them in a really bad way. And even other guys on Tinder described the other men on Tinder as being absolutely horrible. And when men criticize other men and say that they're bad, you know you have to pay attention. Because men usually let things slide with other guys. But the young women said that there were they had undiagnosed mental issues, and they were drug addicts, and they were unreliable, and they didn't look anything like they did in their photos, and this and that. And, and they would be short. So I met this guy, and he was tall, he had lots of hair, like hair on his face, and people were saying, oh, he's what you call a man-man. I was like, okay, a man-man, whatever the hell that is. We met. He told me all about the horrible guys on Tinder. We kind of had a good time, so he asked me to go to a play, which was interesting. It was very cool, and I was like, hey, I'm getting my groove back. I'm going downtown. Whether something or not happens, I'm having fun. And then he asked me to go to see a Shakespeare play in Brooklyn, which required crossing that Brooklyn Bridge. All I could think about was Steve and Miranda crossing the bridge to see if they're going to meet. And even though I knew it was ridiculous, I still went to that like, oh, maybe it's a Sex and the City moment. Maybe this guy will turn out to be the unicorn, the great guy on Tinder. Well, he didn't show up. And I waited, and then everybody went in, and then I was like just the sole person there in the theater, and then I was like, oh well. And I went home, and I texted him, and I was like, I think maybe we must have gotten the date wrong or something. And then I didn't hear from him for 2 days, and then I got a text that said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I took some MDMA mixed with like some other chemical drug, and I tried to drive my car. I got arrested. I tried to fight the cops, and I was in a 48-hour hold. I'm really sorry. And I was like, you know what, dude, it's fine. And that was my Tinder story. And actually, then I went to this black tie event, and I saw a really beautiful woman there. And I said, yeah, do you go on Tinder? And she was like, of course, everybody goes on Tinder. And she was Russian. And I was like, but why do you go on Tinder? You're so beautiful, Shirley, you don't need help finding a man. And she said, oh, darling, it's not about finding a man. It's about getting more Instagram followers. So that's the story of Tinder.
Well, that's a new age. So you have an MNB. There's acronyms throughout. Learn them because they're going to be part of our lexicon soon. My new boyfriend.
Yes.
Is he a cub?
No, he's a man who's my age. And
Hair?
yes, he does. He does. He's tall. He's very supportive. And so people ask a lot, like, what are some of the differences between dating now and dating when you were younger? And one of the differences, chances are you're not looking to reproduce. And, you know, for a lot of women, they don't want to take care of a guy again. You know, they're really looking for something else, and you know.
And what is that something else? Are they looking when we're young? We want to get married. We want to have them move in with us. We want to be a couple. I would assume that women in their 50s and 60s would still want to find that kind of coupling. Am I wrong?
Yeah, you're kind of wrong.
Yeah.
Because I actually would say, you know, definitely half of, you know, it's in the back of people's minds, but, you know, there are also a lot of women who are like, they're done. You know, they've worked the relationship, they've raised kids, and they're tired, and it's a time for them. You know, they really, really want that time to fill their souls without having to take care of somebody else. So
no compromise.
You know, there are just a lot of women that it's, you know, it's their time. They've done the caretaking, and you know, they want to do something different. So, you know, for every woman I'd say who, you know, wants to be with a man, and actually probably the women who are maybe in the trickiest situations are, you know, women who really need to be with a guy and can't be by themselves and have like no experience of like, I'm not with a man, I don't know what to do. So those are really the women who have the hardest time, and they do have to, you know, it's like you got to battle it out with you and learn how to sit in the room with yourself.
You also mentioned menopause, and it's a real thing, and some women feel like it really has, you know, seismic impact on who they are and how they behave and what they want, and some say it's nothing. But you do address the Mona Lisa. And I was very fascinated by the thinning lining of the vagina and how this Mona Lisa treatment for $3,000 and 3 separate treatments plumps up the lining and makes sex fabulous. So is this like a new, like, really big thing that people are doing now to, like, get back into their sexual selves?
Well, it's one of the few things that are out there. Actually, you know, I don't even know if it's still the Mona Lisa, but there is, you know, this laser treatment for the vagina. You can imagine what that might look like. It's the same laser that they use on your skin. It makes sense because what's in there is like skin and muscle. It's not, you know, something different. And it's, you know, the way it works on your skin, it can stimulate the collagen and increase the thickness of the lining. And like a laser for your face, it tends to work for about a third of the people. It will work really well. A third of the people, it will maybe do something, and a third of the people it probably won't work at all. But and it's something where, you know, people always like to make fun of this idea of, you know, women who, they're going to get the Mona Lisa treatment to enhance, you know, their sexual experience or whatever. But the reality is that there are maybe 3 things on the market for women and 77 products for men. And it is something that it does work, and it does help, you know, it can really help women. And then I also discovered that it maybe helped them too much. Because there were, I've heard this story quite a few times. You know, a guy, he got it for his wife for her 50th birthday. And it worked really well. And guess what? She's off with the cub. She's like, dude, I'm done. I found a new life. So, but anyway, I think maybe we should do some questions.
I want to ask you one more
audience.
question. So, everyone has asked you this. You have the same answer, but I'd like to see if you go do a little bit deeper. Is there still sex in the city?
Well, and I'm going to give the same answer. Yes, but probably less. And that's true for supposedly everybody, you know, millennials and all that. I don't know. It's a glib answer. The reality is that, you know, it depends on how you feel about your body, how you feel about sex. You know, the reality is I'm always, like, people you would never think are super sexually adventurous, like, really are. And then people who look like, oh, I'm, like, sexy, they're not.
They're home Saturday nights.
But a friend of mine who got divorced and was determined to find a guy, went online and went through 100 guys. And she had sex with a lot of them. And she found a guy, and she's been with him for the last, I think, year or 2 years. And I saw her the other day, and she was like, Candy, we had sex for an hour and a half. So I was like, yes, there is still sex in the city.
And Candace, what's still on your bucket list? You're this internationally revered author. You're on a book tour. What's next for you?
Well, I'm going to work on the TV series of Is There Still Sex in the City? And my producers are out here. Hello! Hello, Paramount! So that's what I'm working on immediately. And I'm very excited about it because there is so much material in this area and in this time. And
do you think the Me Too movement has made a difference for dating?
You know, I can't answer that. I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody about that, so I don't know. But I feel like, you know, when I travel around, I feel like women come up to me and they say that they feel like this is a new time for women, and especially for, you know, midlife women. And I see a lot of women who are, you know, they're admitting the realities of their lives, and they're admitting that they put a lot of effort into their lives and they're not necessarily getting that happy ending, and they're having to start over. And so there are women who I think are really starting to feel like it's okay to tell the truth about our lives instead of, you know, the candy version where everything's going to be fine in the end, you know, because something's going to happen. Well, you have to make something happen, and you can't wait for someone to come along and make it happen for you. And that's more so true at this age.
Beautiful. I think we do have a few questions in the audience we can take.
I'm going to take a question over here. You want to stand up?
Were you disappointed from the movie that she ends up with Mr. Big? Because normally this type of guy never get married, to be married. And did you end up yourself with Mr. Big?
Oh, did I end up with Mr. Big? No. Like in the TV show, my Mr. Big married somebody else. And and I was really brokenhearted. So it was like the TV series. And in fact, when Mr. Big marries somebody else at the end of the second season of Sex and the City, I really thought the series was over. I was like, okay, great, we did 2 seasons, we told this story, you know, it's like an adventure, and it didn't work out, which is how it would happen in real life. But the show proved to be very popular. And for some reason, people just love Mr. Big. And so they had to bring him back. And then, then it just becomes, it becomes iconic. It's a story like Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, where people are really invested. And, after 10 years of this couple, if they break up after people have been invested in them for 10 years, the audience is going to be sort of pissed off. So, and I'm actually very happy with the show, and I think that was really the right ending for the show. But, a TV show's not real life. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there another question?
You have a question over here?
All right. Someone behind me. Hi, okay, I'm standing.
Hello? I can't see
Hello.
well. Where are you?
Hello, I'm right here. Hi, ladies. I have all my equipment. My name is
Okay, you're
Taylor.
right
I'm with
by
the
the
Hollywood
light.
Reporter. Hi.
Hi.
So obviously these four women, basically the actors and these characters, they're like synonymous with one another, and we can all relate to them. You're working on this very exciting pilot. Are there actors you could already sort of picture in your mind for these new women coming along? Could you possibly name some?
No. I haven't actually thought anything about casting because, the reality is that casting is like, it's a whole thing. People have this idea, and you guys live in Hollywood, so you know this is not true. But the layperson has this idea like, oh, if you write something, you can say, my dream cast is to get, this actor or that actor. That actor's never going to be available. They're never going to want to do your thing, whatever it is. It's all done by like deals and underground networks and all kinds of things. And a lot of people end up approving the cast. So it's, there's always somebody who's going to be at the head of the studio or the network that usually gets final say. The way I am is like, I'll just go along with pretty much what everybody says, because my feeling is by the time you get through the casting system, you're just like, oh, I'm so lucky we have any actors at all. So whoever it is, I will be grateful. That is my feeling.
We have a question back here.
Candace Bushnell. One more?
I have a question. So back when Sex and the City was originally aired, there was really no social media presence the way there is today with like Instagram and Facebook. And I just wondered what kind of your impression was, maybe how that could have changed Sex and the City and how it's like influenced women and dating and...
Right. Well, I don't want to go back and think like, how would something... I think the question you want to ask is, how would I use those things today? Because you can't go back and, Sex and the City is about a very specific time. One of the reasons, it's a non-technological time, so it doesn't really make sense. But thinking about dating today, one of the things that I think is that I think that people would be using Instagram a lot. And, there's also a lot of communication that goes on Instagram. Instagram's also one of the, what's interesting about Instagram to me is that it's an income stream for a lot of women, like women who are entrepreneurial types, can go on Instagram and sell their products and make a career on Instagram. So the characters, whoever whoever's dating now, there's definitely going to be the influence of social media. So it would be there. I mean, I'm always like, let's put these new characters on Instagram, and everyone's like, no. But I mean, I'm all for Instagram.
All right, any final thoughts?
I'm great.
You're great. She is great. Give her a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giselle, and thank you, Candace. This has been a real treat. It's been like having just a girlfriend conversation here, and you really touch on the zeitgeist of the female psyche in a contemporary environment, and what fun this was. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making Visionary Women your first stop. And don't forget that we have copies that are being sold out front of Is There Still Sex in the City? So please line up, and I hope that Candace can be here for a little bit to possibly sign some of them. Thanks very much. We'll see you at Gloria Steinem. Thank you. Good night.
I was just going to say, I was going to sign books. I wanted to encourage the audience to buy a book